Listen to me. I'm going to tell you something that happened to me that changed everything. I'm going to tell you what it was like to get knocked out of the sky over enemy territory and have to walk your way back to friendly lines. Not some book story, not some sanitized version they put in the history books. I'm talking about what actually happened. What really went down when that aircraft came apart and I was hanging upside down in the wreckage wondering if this was it. This was the 70s. Deep into the 70s, when Vietnam was supposedly winding down for everybody else. But for us in SOG Studies and Observation Group, it was ramping up. We were running deeper, hitting harder, pushing further into Laos than anybody had any business pushing. I was a senior NCO by that point, a sergeant major. I'd done things that would make most soldiers' heads spin. Halo jumps at 20,000 feet into the darkness, night raids on North Vietnamese army bases, hand-to-hand combat in rice paddies with artillery coming down like thunder. But this one was going to be different. I didn't know it yet, but I was about to learn something about myself that I'd carry for the rest of my life. The mission looked simple on paper. Too simple. We were supposed to insert a reconnaissance team into a target zone deep in Laos. Real deep. Route package 6 territory. Right along the Ho Chi Minh Trail where the NVA, North Vietnamese Army, was moving supplies and personnel south. The purpose was simple enough. Gather intelligence, photograph enemy positions, SAM sites, vehicle movements, whatever we could get on film and get back to command. You want to know what simple means in the field? Simple means somebody in an air-conditioned office back at base doesn't understand the reality of what's happening out here in the jungle. That's what simple means. That's what it always means. I was flying in an O-2 that morning. An O-2 is a twin-engine observation aircraft. Slow, vulnerable, made out of what felt like aluminum foil and prayer. But it does the job when you need an aircraft that can stay low and stay slow and put eyes on target. I was acting as the FAC, Forward Air Controller. We called it being the Covey Rider. My job was simple too. Coordinate airstrikes. Manage the team once they got on the ground. Be the eyes and ears for command. The pilot's name was Lieutenant Colonel Davidson. Good man, calm under pressure. We'd flown together before, and you learn pretty quick who you can trust in the sky and who's going to lose it when things go wrong. We launched before dawn. That's standard procedure. Before dawn is when you move if you're smart. There's this 5-hour block I always talk about. That window right after last light to about 0500 hours where the enemy is lazy, where they're careless, where they're sleeping. That's when you own the night. That's when you move. That's when professionals operate. We lifted off around 0400 hours and we were over the target zone by first light. The plan was straightforward. Insert the team, establish contact, maintain overwatch while they conducted their reconnaissance mission, get them extracted when the job was done. The first hour went smooth, too smooth. You learn to recognize that feeling after you've been in the business long enough, when things are going exactly according to plan, when everything lines up perfect. That's when the warning bells start ringing. That's nature's way of telling you something's about to go sideways. We were doing circles over the area, marking insertion points, checking for signs of enemy activity, monitoring radio frequencies. Nothing. Not a shot fired, not a radio transmission, not a single thing to indicate we were walking into something hot. At around 0530 hours, we started the insertion sequence. The team was going in by rappel from a Huey coming from a different direction. That's how you do it when you're deep in enemy territory. Multiple insertion methods, unpredictable patterns. Always keep them guessing. Always make it impossible for them to predict what you're doing next. I maintain position about 2 miles away. Altitude roughly 2,500 feet. I was scanning the area with binoculars, monitoring every radio frequency, watching, always watching. That's the job. The helicopter came in and I saw the team fast rope down. Security got established. The helicopter pulled out clean. Everything nominal. Everything by the book. Everything according to plan. That's when it happened. The pilot said something I don't remember the exact words because my brain was processing it at the same moment he was saying it. Something about engine temperature, something about instruments going red. Then he said the words that change everything. We're hit. Not we might be hit. Not I think we're hit. We're hit. Present tense. Current situation. Active crisis. Now listen. Most people think getting shot at from the ground looks like the movies. Dramatic explosions, flames, obvious damage you can see immediately. That's not how it usually works. You get hit by small arms fire. You get hit by automatic weapons. You get hit by anti-aircraft rounds. And at first you don't know how bad it is. You only know that rounds are coming up at you. You only know that your aircraft is taking impacts. And you only know that your options are shrinking by the second. The pilot got on the radio. Professional. No panic in his voice. That's what training does. That's what experience does. Mayday, Mayday. Oscar flight is hit. We are going down now. I looked over at him. His face was calm, but his hands were moving fast, working the controls, trying to keep the airplane flying. The O2 was designed for low-level work, designed for being a slow target, which means it's also designed to take a beating and keep flying. But there's a limit to everything. There's always a limit. Altitude, I asked. Losing it, maybe 1,000 feet, maybe less. You see that clearing over there? He pointed off the right wing. We're going there. The clearing was about 2 kilometers from our position, northeast of the team's insertion point. Small, maybe 100 meters across, surrounded by triple canopy jungle, the kind of dense vegetation that was basically impenetrable unless you knew the terrain intimately. But it was landable, barely, just barely enough space to put an aircraft down without disintegrating completely. I got on the radio. I told the team leader what was happening. I said we were going down. I told them to hold their position and wait for further instructions. I said if possible they should move to assist, but only if it was tactically sound. Only if they could do it without compromising the mission or getting themselves killed. The team leader acknowledged good soldiers. The kind of soldiers you want next to you when everything falls apart. The kind that understand that sometimes the smart move is to hold still and let somebody else figure things out. The pilot brought the nose down. We were at maybe 500 feet now, maybe less. The angle was steep. I could hear the engines laboring, fighting him on the controls. I could see smoke now, thin gray wisps coming from somewhere on the right side of the fuselage. The temperature gauges were completely redlined. Something was catastrophically wrong with that right engine. Something had failed, and failed hard. Brace yourself, the pilot said. That's all the warning I got. That's all the warning you get in situations like this. The impact was unlike anything I'd experienced before. We hit hard. Nose first, the aircraft cartwheeled. I remember the sensation of weightlessness and then the hard impact of metal around me. I remember the sound of the fuselage tearing apart. I remember glass breaking. I remember the horrible screech of metal on metal. I remember thinking with absolute clarity and absolute certainty, I'm dead. This is how it ends. I'm dead right here, right now. But I wasn't. When the aircraft came to rest, I was hanging upside down in the harness, suspended from the ceiling. My head was pounding. Blood ran down my face, not from a wound, but from the pressure of hanging inverted. My right shoulder was screaming. Every nerve ending in my right arm was on fire. The pilot was beside me, similarly suspended, but he wasn't moving. He wasn't making any sound. Lieutenant Colonel, I said. Davidson, come on, let's go. We need to move. Nothing. I took my knife. I always carry a knife. Always. That's not philosophy. That's doctrine. I cut my harness, and I fell about 4 feet onto the twisted ceiling of the fuselage. The pain in my right shoulder shot through me like electricity. I knew immediately. Dislocated, I could feel it. The joint was completely separated, but I didn't have time to deal with it. I didn't have time for pain. That's what we train to do. Compartmentalize. push the pain aside, suppress everything except the mission. That's warrior discipline. That's what separates people who live from people who die. I crawled over to Davidson. He had a pulse. Weak. But it was there. His right leg was pinned under the collapsed console. I tried to lift it to free him, but it wasn't happening. The metal was bent, twisted, compacted. His leg was well and truly caught. I checked him for other wounds. There was a deep gash on his forehead, blood soaking through his flight suit. But the main problem was the leg and the fact that he was unconscious. The main problem was that I couldn't move him without potentially making his injuries catastrophically worse. I made a decision. I had to. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't carry him. I couldn't move him without tools and time I didn't have. So I made the call. I went through the survival gear: map, compass, medical kit, water, emergency rations. I grabbed the signal flare. I grabbed my rifle. I grabbed everything we could carry, and I set up a hasty defensive position in the fuselage about 20 meters from the main wreckage, a place where I could see the primary approach vectors, a place where I could defend if it came to that. "I'll be back," I told Davidson, even though he couldn't hear me, even though he was unconscious. You say things like that because it's something you tell yourself. It's a promise. It's a commitment. It's discipline. That's when I heard the first shots. They were distant at first, maybe 500 meters out. Sporadic, single shots, probing fire. They were trying to locate us, but they knew the general area. They'd seen the aircraft come down. They were going to move toward us. They had time and numbers and terrain knowledge on their side. I had surprise and training. That was the trade. I spent about 30 minutes in and around the fuselage engaging targets that came within 300 meters. I had 180 rounds of ammunition for my rifle. I fired maybe 15 of them, enough to discourage direct assault, not enough to waste ammunition. That's precision. That's training. You count every single round because you don't know when you're going to get resupplied. You don't know if resupply is even coming. So you shoot to communicate. You shoot to establish control of the space around you. You don't spray and pray. The NVA didn't want a firefight. Not yet, anyway. They wanted to surround me, to pin me down, to call in artillery or mortars. That's how they worked. That's their doctrine. Use your numbers. Use your terrain knowledge. Use time as a weapon. I understood it because I'd learned it, because I'd taught it, because I'd lived it for years. By 0900 hours, I knew I had to move. The perimeter was tightening. I could hear it. I could feel it. I could hear the sound of vehicles moving along, route package 6, trucks probably, maybe armor. I could hear radio traffic I recognized as NVA commanders coordinating a larger operation. They were calling in additional units. They were treating this like a priority target, which we were. A downed American aircraft, an American officer, an American NCO. That was a big deal. That was something worth spending soldiers and resources on. I made the call. I got on the survival radio and I told the team leader I was evading into the jungle. I told them to establish a defensive perimeter at their current location. I told them to wait for extraction, and under no circumstances were they to try to link up with me. Adding them to this fight would only mean more casualties, more bodies to get out, more complications. The smart move was to tell them to hold still and let me figure this out alone. That's what I did. I grabbed my compass. I oriented myself. Southwest bearing would take me away from the main concentration of NVA forces and toward friendly territory, toward Thailand, toward areas where we had friendlies. I could navigate by compass. I could navigate by the stars. I could navigate by terrain features. I'd trained for this exact scenario 100 times. Not the aircraft crash part, but the evasion part, the walkout part, the survival part. I moved out at a quick pace. Not running. Running gets you killed. Running makes noise. Running exhausts you. I moved at what we call a tactical walk, fast enough to cover ground, controlled enough to stay quiet, alert enough to stop and hide if I heard pursuit. The jungle around me was dense, triple canopy in most places. The sun barely penetrated. The ground was muddy, slippery, roots everywhere waiting to trip you, streams I had to cross, ravines to navigate. But I'd moved through terrain like this before, many times. Different jungle, same principles. I put about 2 kilometers between myself and the crash site by midday. I could hear pursuit behind me, occasional sounds of movement, radio transmissions. They were tracking me, but they weren't professional about it. Too much noise, too much radio chatter. The NVA had plenty of manpower, but they weren't trained for pursuit evasion against a skilled operator. They were trained for conventional warfare, ambushes, large-scale operations, massed assault. Individual pursuit through complex terrain wasn't their strength. I changed my bearing. Not dramatically, just 20 degrees to the north. That's enough to break contact if they're trying to follow a straight line. That's enough to make tracking harder. I also started moving in a pattern. Move 100 meters. Stop. Listen. 30 seconds of absolute silence. Listen for anything. Any sound that doesn't belong. Any indication of pursuit. Then move again. That pattern breaks up your sound signature. That makes it harder for anyone to locate you. My shoulder was killing me. The pain was constant, radiating down my arm, into my chest. Every movement of my right arm sent electricity through my nervous system, but I did what you're supposed to do. I splinted it. I used vines and torn cloth from my flight suit to create a makeshift sling. I kept my arm immobilized against my body. I gave myself a shot of morphine from the emergency medical kit. It dulled things. It also made everything feel distant and dreamlike, which helped with the fear, which helped with the exhaustion. By late afternoon on that first day, I'd covered maybe 4 kilometers, 4 clicks between me and the crash site. I was moving through increasingly difficult terrain, steeper slopes, thicker vegetation in some areas, more open in others. The terrain was changing. That was good. That meant I was getting away from the main crash area. That meant the pursuit was probably getting frustrated. I set up a shelter that night. Not comfortable, not even really adequate, but something that would keep me out of the rain that was starting to fall. This was monsoon season in Laos. Monsoon weather is relentless. Rain comes in sheets. Visibility drops to almost nothing. Thunder and lightning. The noise of the rain masks your own movement, but it also masks the sound of anyone moving toward you. Cuts both ways. I didn't sleep. Not really. I stayed alert, eyes open, listening, watching the darkness for any indication of movement, any sound that didn't belong. I took water from the leaves of nearby plants. I chewed on some of the emergency rations. Hard to get down without much water. But you get it down because your body needs fuel. Your body needs calories. Around 0300 hours, I heard voices. Close. Maybe 50 meters. I chambered around on my rifle but didn't fire. The voices moved past. They were searching, but they were searching blind. The rain was my ally. The darkness was my ally. The terrain was my ally. Day 2 started the same way. Move, stop, listen. The shoulder was worse. The morphine had worn off, and the pain was back. Sharp and present. I wrapped it tighter, kept it immobilized, kept walking. I put another 3 kilometers between me and where I estimated the crash site to be, southeast now. I had changed direction during the night when I felt like I'd lost the active pursuit. The jungle was different once you got deep into it. The sounds changed. The birds went quiet when humans moved through millions of insects, mosquitoes, leeches that attached to your skin, ants that bit like fire. I'd learned years ago to ignore them, to accept that they were part of the environment, to focus on the mission. The mission was walking. The mission was surviving. The mission was getting to friendly territory. I found water on day 2, a stream, relatively clean, flowing north to south. I followed it for a while, staying slightly away from the water line to avoid leaving obvious tracks. Then I crossed it and changed my bearing again. That's evasion technique. That's tactical movement. That's not just theory from some manual. That's what keeps you alive when there are people looking for you with rifles in their hands. By day 3, I'd noticed something important. The radio traffic I occasionally intercepted had changed. The panic was gone. The urgency was gone. They were still searching, still looking for me, but they weren't searching with the same intensity. They'd probably concluded I'd made it to friendly territory or died in the jungle. Either way, I wasn't worth the same priority level anymore. That meant they'd scale back the pursuit. That meant the noose was loosening. That meant I had a chance. My water was running critically low. Maybe 1 bottle left. 1 bottle of drinking water is nothing. When you're walking through jungle in tropical heat in the monsoon season, 1 bottle is emergency rations only. The food I carried was gone, completely consumed. I'd eaten all of it by day 3. The emergency rations had sustained me, but they were calorie dense enough that they ran out fast. My rifle still had maybe 150 rounds of ammunition. I'd need those rounds if I encountered a firefight, but I was hoping not to have to use them. Ammunition is weight. Weight slows you down. Speed is what keeps you alive. My compass was working perfectly. No damage from the crash. No water damage to the dial. My map was water damaged. The paper was falling apart in places, but it was still readable. I could still navigate by it. I was moving south and slightly east now. That heading would eventually take me toward Thailand, toward areas outside of Laos, toward friendly territory. I'd cover maybe 12 kilometers in 3 days. That was slow. That was very slow. But I was alone. I was injured. I was navigating through some of the most difficult terrain on the planet. Day 4, I crossed what I thought was a small trail. Might have been used by local villagers, might have been used by irregular NVA forces or Pathet Lao militia. I didn't cross it directly. That was basic fieldcraft. Fundamental security practice. You don't advertise your crossing points. You don't create a sign that says American came through here. I paralleled the trail for a while, staying 50 meters off the main path, observing, watching for any indication of recent use or enemy activity. Then I crossed quickly and changed my bearing. The jungle started to change around day 5. The terrain got steeper, much steeper. The vegetation started thinning in places. That meant I was getting into different elevation zones, different vegetation zones. That meant I was making progress. That meant I was getting out of the lowland jungle and into the higher terrain. The mountains of Laos aren't like the Rocky Mountains out west. These mountains are older, weathered down, but they're still serious terrain. Trying to navigate them alone is exhausting, especially when you haven't eaten real food in days, especially when your shoulder is dislocated and screaming with every step. By day 6, I was running on fumes. Empty tank, my water was completely gone. I drunk the last of it that morning. I was thirsty, real thirsty, the kind of thirst that makes you hallucinate. Dehydration was setting in hard. I could feel it in my head, that lightheaded sensation, the slight tremor in my hands. Altitude and heat and lack of water do that. They do it fast, they do it brutal. I found another stream on day 6. Clean water flowing over rocks. I drank carefully. Too much too fast on an empty stomach will make you sick, will make you vomit, will waste precious water. So I drank in measured amounts, just enough to wet my mouth, just enough to hydrate my throat. Then I refilled my bottle. Then I kept moving. My right arm was completely stiff by day 6. I couldn't move my shoulder properly, couldn't lift my arm. The makeshift splint I'd created on day 1 had come loose somewhere around day 3. I'd just left it off. It hurt less to have it hanging loose than to have it bound up tight. The pain was manageable now. The morphine had worn off completely. The initial shock of the dislocation had faded. I'd adapted. That's what the human body does. It adapts. The terrain was changing dramatically now. I was crossing through areas of farmland, small plots of vegetables, indications of recent cultivation. That meant I was getting close to inhabited areas. Farmland meant villages. Villages could mean friendly territory. Villages could also mean NVA patrols or militia checkpoints. I had to be extremely careful. I had to move with precision and caution. Around day 6 evening, I saw smoke from a cooking fire, maybe 2 kilometers away. I altered my heading to give that area a wide berth. Went around it, stayed off trails, avoided any indication of human habitation. I was getting close to something, close to a boundary line, close to areas where the political situation was complicated, where friendly forces might be, where enemy forces definitely were. I had to be smart about it. Days 7 and 8 blurred together into a continuous flow of movement and survival. I was moving through farmland now, cultivated areas, places where people lived, which was dangerous and helpful at the same time. Dangerous because people meant witnesses and potential enemy contact. Helpful because it meant I was getting close to settled areas, close to places where there might be communication, close to places where I might be able to contact friendly forces. I moved extra careful through those areas, stayed off trails completely, avoided villages, avoided any direct contact. I was becoming more animal than human at this point, moving at dusk, moving at dawn, avoiding midday when visibility was highest, living on whatever I could find, roots, leaves, the occasional insect or small creature, anything that had calories, anything that would fuel my body for another few kilometers of walking. On day 8 morning, I saw an aircraft, high altitude, heading south, American fighter jet. I recognized it immediately, the silhouette, the flight profile. That was when I knew for certain that friendly forces were looking for me. That was when I knew extraction was possible. Not certain, but possible. I had to establish contact. I had my small survival radio, emergency frequency, limited range, but it was all I had. I found a small clearing around midday, nothing big, maybe 50 meters across, surrounded by jungle on all sides, but open enough for a helicopter to see, open enough for an aircraft to mark. I got on the survival radio, kept it brief, on emergency frequency. I said my call sign. I gave my location as best I could estimate it. I said I was an American pilot evading on the ground in Laos. The response came back after maybe 30 seconds. Someone got me. I can't remember who now. Doesn't matter. What mattered was I was connected. They gave me a bearing, told me to hold position, said they were coordinating extraction, said I had to maintain radio silence except for emergency calls, said a helicopter was en route. Estimated time of arrival was 8 hours. 8 hours. I could do 8 hours. I'd already done 8 days. 8 hours was nothing. I dug in near that clearing, set up a hasty defensive position, marked the area with emergency signals. I had a signal mirror, plain mirror with a double hole drilled through it, standard survival kit issue. I positioned it so I could use it if I heard aircraft passing at altitude far away. The technique is simple. You angle the mirror to catch the sun, you flash it in the direction of the aircraft. If they see it, they do something to acknowledge. Rev engines, rock wings, flashlights, something, anything to confirm contact. The sun was high, so I practiced with the mirror. Got my angles right, made sure I understood the geometry, made sure I could execute it correctly when the time came. The wait was the hard part. The waiting is always harder than the doing. The waiting gives you time to think, time to doubt, time to consider that maybe rescue isn't coming, maybe I'll be stuck here, maybe I'll have to keep walking. But rescue was coming. I heard the helicopter first, then I saw it, a Huey coming in from the west, flying low, approaching fast. I got on the radio, confirmed my position, the pilot acknowledged. He came in hard and fast. Unpredictable approach, security protocol, gunships flying cover, door gunners visible. This was real. I broke from my position and sprinted for the clearing. My shoulder was screaming. Every step was agony. But you push through that. You push through the pain because the alternative is getting left behind, is getting captured, is getting killed. The helicopter touched down. I ran to it. Door gunner reached out. I grabbed his hand and I pulled myself up into the aircraft. The moment I was clear, the helicopter lifted. We were up. We were moving. We were extracting. I remember looking back at that jungle as we climbed out. That jungle that had tried to kill me, that had beaten me down, that I'd walked through for 9 days on sheer will and training and the absolute refusal to quit. That jungle was getting smaller, getting further away, getting left behind. The helicopter flight back to base was surreal. The cabin was loud. The wind from the open doors was intense. But I didn't care. We were going home. That was all that mattered. That was the only thing that registered. When we landed, I remember people running toward the aircraft. Medical personnel, command staff, other operators. They pulled me out and they got me on a stretcher. They were asking me questions, but I couldn't focus on the words. My mind was still back in that jungle, still processing, still trying to comprehend that I'd actually made it. They took me to the hospital, got me cleaned up, dealt with the dislocated shoulder, treated the wounds, fed me real food, let me sleep in a real bed. And somewhere in that process, I realized something important. I realized that I'd learned something out there that I couldn't have learned any other way. Davidson made it. They found him at the crash site. A reaction force got to the aircraft before the NVA did. His leg was damaged. Infection had started setting in. He was in bad shape, but he lived. We saw each other years later, much later. After we'd both retired from active service, he remembered that last thing I said to him before I bailed out of the fuselage. He said it meant something. That promise, that commitment to come back. That's what warriors do. They make promises to each other, and they keep them, or they die trying. The 9 days I spent walking out of Laos weren't the worst days of my career. They weren't the most dangerous days, not by a long shot. I've been in situations that were more intense, more immediately life-threatening, but they were important, crucially important. They proved something to me that I already knew intellectually, but that I needed to prove to myself practically. You can prepare, you can train, you can study the terrain, you can memorize tactics, you can run scenarios 1,000 times. But when it comes down to it, when it's just you in the jungle and the enemy, and the only way out is through your own effort and your own will, that's when everything else falls away. That's when you find out who you really are. That's when you discover what you're actually made of. I volunteered for everything after that. Every mission, every tasking, every operation that came down the line. Some people said I had a death wish. Some people said I was crazy. Some people said I was trying to prove something, but they were wrong. I knew exactly what I'd learned in that jungle. I knew the value of that experience. I knew that survival like that changes you, makes you better, makes you understand what you're capable of. That's when I really understood what a warrior is. A warrior is a guy that wishes to be involved, period. Not involved in glory, not involved in fame, involved in the work, involved in the mission, involved in the moment when everything matters and the outcome is in doubt. That's what warriors are. That's what defines them. Not their kill count, not their medals, not their rank, but their presence, their willingness to be there, their refusal to quit. Here's what I learned that I want you to understand. You're going to face things in your life that seem impossible, completely impossible. You're going to be in situations where quitting would be easier, where giving up would be more comfortable. That's when you remember that 9-day walk. That's when you remember that warriors don't quit because quitting isn't an option. Warriors quit when the mission is complete or when they're dead. There's no middle ground. There's no option 3. The tactical lessons from that experience stuck with me forever, and I want to pass them to you. First lesson, never rely on one communication system. Never. Always have backup. Always have backup to your backup. My primary radio was gone, lost in the crash, lost in the jungle, but I had the survival radio. That secondary system is what kept me alive. That's the principle. Build redundancy into everything. Second lesson, compass navigation is more reliable than any technology will ever be. GPS can fail, electronics fail, batteries die, but a compass works, always works. Understanding the relationship between your location and cardinal directions is fundamental. It's basic. It's something everyone should know, something everyone should practice. Third lesson, small arms ammunition is currency. It's valuable. Never waste a round. Every round you fire should accomplish something, should communicate something, should establish control of the space around you. Spray and pray gets people killed. Precision gets people home. Fourth lesson, language is learned in the field, not in classrooms. It's a survival necessity. You go to the country you're going to work in and you need the language to stay alive. You're going to learn the language enough to get by. When I operated in Laos, I had to understand the regional languages, the dialects, the way people communicated. That understanding protected me, helped me blend in, helped me navigate. Fifth lesson, constant movement prevents compromise. If you stay in the same spot too long, they'll have your ass just from observing from 500 yards away. You have to keep moving, keep changing position, keep making yourself a hard target. Sixth lesson, moving at night when enemies are sleeping is your greatest advantage. There's a 5-hour block from last light to about 0500 hours where you own the night. That's when you move. That's when you work. That's when professionals operate. The enemy doesn't like to work at night. They're lazy at night. They're careless. That's your window. But beyond all of those tactical lessons, there's something bigger, something more important. That walk taught me about the human capacity for endurance, the human ability to keep going when everything in your body is screaming to stop. My shoulder was dislocated. My arm was useless. I had no food. I had minimal water. I was in hostile territory. Every logical argument for giving up was there. But I didn't give up because giving up wasn't an option, because warriors don't quit, because the mission wasn't complete until I was back in friendly territory. That's what separates survivors from casualties. Not luck, not circumstance, but the simple unwillingness to quit. The decision that you're going to make it. The commitment to that decision, even when making it, costs you everything. I came out of that crash site with a dislocated shoulder, no food, limited water, and the entire NVA wondering where I was. I came out because I decided I was going to come out. Simple as that. No philosophy, no motivation speech, just decision, pure decision, the absolute commitment to get from point A to point B no matter what it cost. Never quit, never quit, never quit. That's not just a saying. That's not just motivation on a poster. That's the foundation of warrior culture. That's what separates warriors from civilians. That's what makes the difference when everything else fails. You're probably not going to be shot down over Laos. You're probably not going to have to walk through a jungle for 9 days with a dislocated shoulder and no food. That's not your situation. That's not your life. But the principles apply to you anyway. That's the important part. The tactical lessons transfer. The warrior philosophy transfers. The refusal to quit transfers. When you volunteer for everything at your job. When you say yes to the small tasks that nobody wants to do. when you take on the work that seems insignificant. You're operating on the same principle I'm talking about. You're establishing yourself as someone who doesn't turn down work, someone who's reliable, someone who can be counted on. That leads to bigger opportunities. That leads to more significant work. That leads to advancement and success. Volunteering for everything means you become indispensable. You become the person people want on their team. Documentation is survival. That's a principle that applies to your civilian life just as much as it applies to military operations. Write things down. Record your work. Take photographs. Keep evidence of what you do and when you do it. Don't show us a goddamn bunch of shit in writing. We want to see photographs. We want visual evidence. That applies to your career. Document your projects. Keep records. Protect yourself with evidence. Capture is better than kill. That's not just tactical doctrine. That's a philosophy about solving problems. Killing is easy. You eliminate the problem through force. But what do you have once you kill somebody? You got a dead body to get out? You got a situation that's more complicated than it was before? Capturing the problem, understanding it, extracting intelligence from it. That takes patience, that takes skill, but the strategic advantage is exponentially greater. Apply that to your own challenges. Try to understand them. Try to extract the information you need. Try to solve them in ways that give you more than just an empty victory. The 5-hour block principle. The window where enemies are lazy and you own the time, that applies to civilian life too. There are times when you have advantage, times when conditions are favorable, times when you should be executing your plans. Learn to recognize those windows. Learn to exploit them. Don't wait for perfect conditions, but don't ignore favorable conditions either. Language and cultural understanding. Learning enough to navigate effectively. That's not just survival in foreign countries. That's survival in any environment you're not native to. Understanding how people think, understanding how they communicate, understanding their expectations and their patterns. That's what keeps you safe. That's what keeps you effective. Constant movement prevents compromise. Don't become predictable. Don't let yourself get boxed in by routine. Constantly evolve. Constantly change your approach. Stay ahead of whatever's hunting you. In business, that means staying ahead of competitors. In life, that means not letting circumstances trap you. The bottom line is this. When you're facing something difficult, when quitting would be easier, when pain or exhaustion or fear is telling you to stop, that's when you remember what you're made of. That's when you draw on something deeper than comfort. That's when you become a warrior about your own life. The 11 days I spent getting out of Laos changed everything about how I understood my own capability. Every time I've faced something hard since then, every time I've wanted to quit, every time it seemed impossible, I've remembered that walk, and I've kept going. And every time I've kept going, I've discovered that I was stronger than I thought, that I could endure more than I believed, that the human capacity for perseverance is almost unlimited if you just refuse to quit. That's what I want you to take from this. Not the survival story, not the tactical details, although those matter, not the story about being shot down and walking out, although that happened. The thing I want you to take is this. You're more capable than you think. You're stronger than you believe. And when everything in your life seems impossible and the only way out is through, the answer is through. The answer is one step at a time. The answer is refusing to quit. Never quit. Never quit. Never quit. That's not philosophy. That's not motivation. That's survival. That's warrior doctrine. That's what separates the living from the dead. That's what separates success from failure. That's what separates people who achieve their goals from people who talk about achieving their goals. I volunteered for everything after Laos. I ran missions that most people wouldn't run. I took risks that most people wouldn't take. Not because I had a death wish, not because I was crazy, but because I understood what I was made of. I understood that I could endure. I understood that warrior spirit isn't something you're born with. It's something you build through experience, through challenges, through refusing to quit when quitting is easier. That's available to you. That warrior quality, that refusal to accept defeat, that's not exclusive to military people. That's not something you need special training to access. You just need to decide. You need to decide that you're not going to quit, that you're going to push through, that you're going to see it through no matter what it costs. That's my story. That's what happened when I got shot down over Laos. That's what I learned walking through jungle for 9 days. That's what I want you to understand about warrior culture and warrior philosophy and what it actually means to refuse to quit. Never quit. Never quit. That's it. That's the message. That's everything. Let me give you more detail on what the actual walking was like, because understanding the physical reality of evasion is important to understanding warrior doctrine. The jungle in Laos during the 70s wasn't just dense. It was actively hostile. Every plant had a defense mechanism: thorns, spines, leaves that would cut your skin like razors. The ground beneath your feet was treacherous, mud that would suck at your boots, roots designed to trip you up, streams that appeared without warning. The heat was relentless, not just hot, oppressively hot. The kind of heat that makes your mind fuzzy, that makes rational thought difficult. I was moving at roughly 3 kilometers per day, maybe 4 on good days. That's not fast. That's slow. That's deliberately controlled movement through hostile territory. You don't rush evasion. You don't run from pursuit blindly. You move with purpose. You move with precision. You move knowing that speed is secondary to staying undetected. The hunger was worse than the heat, the lack of food. By day 4, my stomach was completely empty. By day 5, I was weak, genuinely weak. My muscles were starting to consume themselves because there was no external fuel. I knew this would happen. I'd trained for it. But knowing it's coming and experiencing it are two different things. You experience real hunger in the field and it changes your perspective on everything. Water became an obsession. Finding water, not getting sick from water, balancing hydration with the risk of exposure. You can't visit the same water source twice because that's predictable, and predictability gets you killed. You have to find new water. Verify it's safe. Drink enough to sustain, but not so much that you get sick. It's a constant calculation. By day 7, I was operating on pure instinct and training. My conscious mind had largely shut down. I was moving because I'd trained my body to move. I was making decisions because my training dictated what decisions to make. That's what years of preparation does. It takes over when conscious thought becomes impossible. Your muscle memory and your training become your operating system. I know this because I've trained soldiers to understand it. When you're exhausted, when you're hungry, when you're scared, when you're in genuine danger, that's when training takes over. That's when what you've practiced 1,000 times in the rear area suddenly becomes reality. That's when the gap between soldiers who have trained hard and soldiers who just went through the motions becomes obvious. The hard trainers survive, the others don't. The night movement was easier than day movement. Darkness is an ally when you understand it, when you've trained in it. I'd done hundreds of night movements, halo jumps at night, combat operations at night, movement through hostile territory at night. Night was where I was comfortable. During the day, I was always tense, always expecting contact, but at night, I could almost relax, could move with confidence, could use the darkness to my advantage. The fear was constant but manageable. Fear is a tool if you understand how to use it. Fear is a warning system. Fear tells you to pay attention. Fear tells you that something matters. I wasn't trying to suppress the fear. I was acknowledging it and using it. The soldiers who try to eliminate fear are the ones who take stupid risks. The soldiers who accept fear and work with it are the ones who survive. I thought about Davidson a lot during those walks. Thought about whether I should go back, whether I should try to reach him. Those thoughts would come up and I'd push them aside. Because logically I knew that going back would get us both killed, that trying to be a hero would just add another casualty to the situation. The smart thing was to get to friendly territory and report his position to people who could actually help him. That's what the head says. But the heart says something different. The heart says you don't leave people behind. The heart says you go back. The heart says you try. That's the internal battle that warriors face. The conflict between logical survival and moral obligation. The tension between personal safety and loyalty to your brothers. There's no clean answer to that. There's no principle that resolves it completely. You just do your best, you make the decisions that you think are right, and you live with the consequences. But here's what I know now. Looking back from decades of distance, making the call to keep moving forward and get help was the right decision. It was the decision that allowed Davidson to be rescued. It was the decision that allowed both of us to live. And that's what matters. Not the heroic narrative, not the story of going back, but the practical reality of what actually saves lives. That's a lesson I want to pass on. Sometimes the warrior thing isn't the aggressive thing. Sometimes the brave thing is the smart thing. Sometimes refusing to make the dramatic sacrifice is what actually saves people. That's not cowardice. That's wisdom. That's understanding that your life has value, that your competence has value, that staying alive to help others is better than dying in a gesture. I carry all of that with me still. Every time I make a decision under pressure, every time I face a choice between comfort and duty, every time something seems impossible, I remember that walk. I remember the exhaustion. I remember the pain. I remember the fear. And I remember what it felt like to keep moving anyway, to refuse to stop, to push through when stopping would have been so much easier. That's the lasting impact of 9 days in a jungle. That's what real survival teaches you. It's not about the specific tactics. It's about the deeper understanding of what you're capable of. The unwavering knowledge that you can endure more than you ever thought possible. The absolute certainty that quitting is always an option, but that you're not going to take it. Never quit. Never quit. Never quit. That mantra carried me through that jungle. That mantra has carried me through everything since. That's what I want to pass on to you. Not the story. The principle. Not the survival. The philosophy. That you're stronger than you think. That you're more capable than you believe. And that when everything is telling you to give up, that's exactly when you keep going. That's exactly when you become who you're meant to be. That's what I learned in that jungle over those 9 days, walking through hell with nothing but my training and my will to keep me alive. That's what got me through when everything in my body was screaming to quit. That's what I want you to carry with you when you face your own impossible situations and your own moments of doubt. You don't need to be shot down over Laos to understand warrior doctrine. You don't need to walk through a jungle for 9 days on an empty stomach with a dislocated shoulder. You just need to refuse to quit when everything is telling you to stop. You just need to make the decision that you're going to keep moving forward no matter what it costs. That's all it takes. That's everything. That's what separates people who achieve their goals from people who give up when things get hard. Never quit. Never quit. That's the message. That's the principle. That's the foundation of everything I've learned and everything I want to pass on to you.